Thank you all for joining us. Before we get started on the panel discussion, I'd like to thank Mr. Vasu Gandikota, Mr. Krishna, South First and TV9 for putting this futuristic health summit together. So, in the panel, we will hopefully take you all for an amazing ride in the next hour or so. A ride at the end of which you will all emerge thinking that you should have raised your hands when Dr. Sangeeta Reddy asked you whether you live 100 years, because you can. And we'll try and show you with the longevity champions here how you can actually do that. The overriding theme for today's panel discussion will be, how do you see yourself in 2050, right? Now, I mean, if we all shift the focus of healthcare from sick care in hospitals to making sure that everyone's well and remains healthy as possible, if we actually start dedicated centers to wellness, positive health, and longevity, because that is definitely the need of the hour, because we find that in tertiary care, quaternary care hospitals, you have preventive medicine in one little floor or one little corner of the hospital, and the rest of the hospital is all geared to managing critical patients and doing procedures, etc. So the focus does have to shift from sick care to positive health and care in a way that keeps people healthy. And if you actually aim, because you have to aim to be healthy in 20, 25 years from now, then you can get there. So currently what happens is that, let's say, none of us believe that we'll live 100, but we do believe that we'll probably live, people in this room and those online will probably live about 80 years, 78 to 80 years, right? But what happens is that if you're totally healthy at 100% and let's say at 20 or 30 years of age, health starts to decline. And compared to what you were at 25 or 30, you're only half of you left in terms of being healthy by the time you're 65. But if you actually get into predictive and preventive medicine and then personalized interventions, both by human experts and AI-aided advice are followed, then this curve can actually lift up and give us 15 more years of life, because lifespan is the number of years you live, and 20 years more of good health. And health span is the number of years that you remain healthy. So this curve will actually become like that instead of like that. Now, the math is simple. We actually have the science today to make this happen. And I'll just show you how. 25% of us will die from an MI, heart attack. And in fact, 25% of the first heart attacks are killers. So that's the only heart attack some of us will have, right? But the thing is that 90% of heart attacks are preventable. 10% of us will die from cancer, and these are Indian figures. We've actually searched all papers and resources, and these are Indian figures, right? So 10% will die from cancer, 50% of it is preventable, 10% will die from a brain stroke, 80% preventable. Dr. Manveer Bhatia here, who's a neurologist and sleep medicine expert, tells me that 8% of Indians more than 60 have dementia, and 70% of them will actually die from it. It's not just memory lapses, it's a killer. And nearly half of them are preventable. 20% of Indians die from respiratory disease, 70% preventable. 5% die from diabetes directly and its complications. 90% deaths are preventable. 4% liver disease, 90% preventable. 3% kidney disease, again 90% preventable. So, there you have. If we actually prevent or diagnose early all the diseases that kill us, naturally you'll live 15, 20 years longer and healthier. I mean, it's just very simple. And the science exists today, and that's what we're going to discuss in the next 60 minutes. So now, Riti Lumba, who takes care of the Fortis Cancer Institutes across the country and is very interested in preventive and predictive healthcare as applied to oncology. Do you want to tell us how you can actually detect disease early or even predict disease before it actually happens? What sort of diagnostics you use specifically in relation to the 4 or 5 killer diseases like diabetes, cancer, heart disease, and neurovascular disease and neurodegenerative disorders. So take us through the diagnostics, basics and advanced that help us diagnose these things in a way that we can predict disease and detect early disease. You can just talk from there, because I'm going to come there and now I'm going to keep sitting there.
Okay. Yeah, I'll be more comfortable standing and talking.
Hi, also, thank you, Dr. Soin, for that question. I think, what you've already set the tone for the day started from Dr. Sangeeta Reddy's talk and to your initial context of setting the preventables, and when I deep dive into the predictable and the preventable, I would first want to refer to the 4 horsemen that we would all end up landing with as we age. And now from those 4 horsemen, from four of those horsemen, I would want to start with the metabolic syndrome. Now, metabolic syndrome per se was something that was developed as a cluster of problems, which are very, very basic. Today, we talk about cholesterols. So high triglycerides, low healthy cholesterol, which is the HDL, a high blood pressure, high sugars, and the cluster, and truncal obesity. When all of these 5 combine, they call the metabolic syndrome. When all 5 of these are present in a patient, it was earlier in the 1980s referred to as something like a syndrome X, which evolved as metabolic syndrome, and now this metabolic syndrome actually becomes a precursor for rest of the 3-4 horsemen as we develop during time. Now, how do we predict them? The question is, how do we predict them? How do we prevent, diagnose it, detect it early in our lives? So, obviously sugars, we all talk about sugars, but what we do not talk about when as the sugars are rising, they're taking those trends, we do not talk about insulin resistance. That is a very, very important marker. And if your sugars are good, sugars are normal, then we also do not talk about putting stress on our system to check, through maybe an oral glucose tolerance test to see that, how well are we performing in terms of our sugars when the body is put under pressure. Similarly, the DEXA scan, we all talk about the BMI, we talk about BMI, which is basically the index, the score between your height and your weight, but we do not talk about truncal obesity, and we do not talk about our composition in terms of our body fat, in terms of our muscle mass, so which are very, very important. I mean, for truncal obesity, just for starters, more than 40 inches your waist circumference for men and more than 35 for women is truncal obesity. We are not referring to that. And all those things combined are actually precursors for when we land into a heart disease, a stroke or a neurodegenerative disorder, and the cancers. Now, obviously, this metabolic syndrome is, I'll want to spend 1 more minute on metabolic syndrome, because now this is where the problem is. This is where the problem is when I say that it increases the risk of cardiac problems by around 70%, 75%. So close monitoring of blood pressure becomes very, very critical when we talk about heart disease, because atherosclerotic disease, once set in, reversal is another thing. But if we just monitor our blood pressures, as simple as that, and if we have a genetic predisposition by virtue of having a parent or a sibling who's gone through a heart attack, there should be nothing that stops us from a CAC score. Now, if there is calcium in your coronaries, we are pretty late in the day, but that is like a very, very big red flag. And it's an absolutely non-invasive procedure. One can just go through. And if there is, if you want to go one more step further, a CT angio is something that is a very, very definitive result, that gives you a very definitive response. Now, AI has come into play when the sensitivity of your CT angio is far more, it can pick up a soft plaque of up to, a 10%, where that, those are the soft plaques which dislodge and cause an MI attack, and when Dr. Soin says that, 25% of people's first heart attack will be their last. That is a very, very alarming figure, and we all need to be prepared to not land up in such situations. And I think the famous singer, KK, he shook the industry, he shook the country, he was just doing a performance, and when he had an MI, and we all know what happened after that, it was his last. So obviously all those scary, and it was almost a similar time when a sultan in Dubai had a similar episode. I think it's all time, we are sitting all on ticking bombs, and all we have to do is just those 5 tests, check your cholesterols, check your regular monitoring of your blood pressures, your truncal obesity. If you have truncal obesity reverses, that's absolutely reversible, right? You just have to put in right measures there. And there are obviously there are more advanced lipid testing when you go into the details. When you talk about stroke and neurodegenerative disorders, MRI. Again, today there is a trend of, in the West, they're talking about whole body MRIs with MRI in the brain, which is with AI enabled, which is more specific, which will be able to pick up the early signs of your dementias and all the neurodegenerative disorders setting in. The ApoE4 gene, for that matter, which is a predictor for Alzheimer's. And when we do all of this, and as I come to cancer screening, now there's a lot being spoken about cervical cancer screening. I have not put it here, but seeing the audience, I'm quite intrigued to ask a question. How many of you have taken the cervical cancer vaccination? So the cervical cancer vaccination is, and how many of you think only women need a cervical cancer or HPV vaccination? How many of you think only women need cervical cancer vaccination or a HPV vaccination? Men need it too. So because it is a virus, and men are not immune from the virus. So the right age group, which is, the West, they say about 9 to 15 years of age, cervical cancer vaccination. Now, cervical cancer is one of the most preventable cancers. 87% prevention with the cervical cancer vaccine, and obviously, it is one cancer that is happening because of a virus. So it's only about early detection of that virus. I'm going a little detail more in cervical cancer, but yes, the idea is early detection. There is so much that is preventable just by being knowledge, just by being awareness. And obviously there is, we talk about genetic predispositions. How many of you think cancers happen only genetic? Any thoughts? Do you think cancer is only genetic? If you do not have genes which cause you cancer, will not cause you cancer? No, so it's only 5% cancers which have absolute this thing that it will be only genetic, but rest are multifactorial and not genetic. So whole genomic sequencing will obviously help you, enable you understand what's happening in, what are you predisposed to, and that helps one to understand also, now these are days when we are also talking about the epigenetic aging, where you can see your chronological age is actually matching your actual age, and then you can work modalities to reverse them. A gut health microbiome, today spoken a lot about. I'm sure Dr. Manvi will talk about sleep, and I'm referring to sleep apnea tests here. Cognitive function tests in depression and anxiety screening, and and all these are very, very basic, simplistic, early predictors, changes in this, So I always say, you don't know exactly what's happening inside your body till you actually look inside. You have to look into it to know what's happening and prevent it and early detect and reverse it. I think I'm done.
Right, hello. Can someone get this going? Yeah, thank you very much, Riti. So, Umair, it's your turn now. Riti has nicely set the stage and told us what diagnostics you can use to predict disease or diagnose the 4 killers early. And These killers again are diabetes, cancer, neurovascular disease, and cardiovascular disease. Would you like to take us through all the lifestyle changes, modifications, drugs, supplements that can actually be used in a personalized fashion once you do pick up a risk for someone to have one or more of these diseases, or for that matter, detect them early? So Umair Kadir from London, Hook London. Hook London is a famous longevity clinic, and Umair is a full-time longevity physician. So Umair, give us your insights.
Thank you for inviting me on, and thank you for setting the stage already for some very important discussions. Uh, I'll start off by talking a little bit about metabolic disease and touching on things that we can do to try. So I think Vritti has already talked quite a lot about what it is and why it's important to try and target it. I suppose the way that I would talk about it is in three different steps. The first way to discuss this, it would be in terms of lifestyle intervention. So one of the main reasons that it causes a problem is that most people are unaware that they're actually even entering metabolic syndrome. There's no real symptoms to it. We end up getting central deposition of fat in the abdomen. We end up getting a slowly creeping blood pressure. We end up with raised cholesterol and triglycerides, but we don't really see any symptoms of this. And we talked earlier on, well, Bridget mentioned about insulin resistance. And again, there won't really be signs and symptoms of this unless there's labs or diagnostics to check this out. One of the things that we can do is control our nutrition. And I suppose the two important concepts that I'd like to introduce are things called satiety index and feeding windows. So a satiety index, the best way to understand this is how many times have you been sat at a table and you've looked at the food in front of you and you're just about okay. You're no longer hungry, but actually you think, you know what, this food looks delicious. I think I'm just going to finish the rest of the plate anyway. And just because people are serving, I'll get another plate too. So you end up, every time we eat at a sort of a 10 out of 10 sort of fullness because we're just used to it. Food abundance is so much of a problem now. Instead, by having a satiety index once we're hungry up until we are no longer hungry, and then we sort of put the food away or don't eat anymore. It's one of the simplest interventions you can make to try and help. Feeding windows as well. So obviously people talk a lot about intermittent fasting and how that can sort of help limit the food intake that we have to stop overconsumption. And there is evidence that you can limit this by sort of sticking to a 10-hour window simply because there is just a limited or finite amount of food that you can eat in that sort of short period of time. Other things we can do is increase our protein intake. Protein is a building block of muscle, but also is one of the substrates that sort of keeps us fuller for as long as possible. So aiming for about 1 to 1.5 grams per pound of body weight is a good metric to go by. And it will also have impact when we come to sort of resistance training as well. The other thing we can do is increase our fiber intake. Fiber, again, keeps us nice and full and feeds that gut microbiome. And aiming for about 30 grams a day of fiber can be really helpful. Obviously, most diets don't really contain much fiber, so rapidly increasing that may lead to some unwanted side effects in terms of bloating and abdominal discomfort. But ultimately, slowly building to that will be really helpful. Medication-wise, drugs-wise, there are lots of hype medications that are out there, and they all have a fantastic place, and it's amazing that we do have some of these medications. So obviously the one that's on a lot of people's lips is things like GLP-1 agonists like Ozempic, or the newer ones like Mounjaro, and they are very, very effective, and they do help people lose weight, but without laying that foundation of nutrition and physical fitness, about 2/3 of people just gain the weight straight back as soon as they've stopped that medication. So it's really important to put in those principles for nutrition and fitness that I think are going to be talked about a little bit further on in this discussion too. There's also evidence of medication like flozins, which are SGLT2 inhibitors, like dapagliflozin, and they have also shown some evidence in terms of longevity, but in populations that are sort of diseased, such as those with heart failure and chronic kidney disease. But it may be one for the future that is emerging that can show some promise. So ultimately, there's a lot that we can do, and by limiting the metabolic syndrome and limiting these symptoms that you can get early on with using some of these interventions, you can stop that progression to then moving on towards cardiovascular disease. So I'll move on to cardiovascular disease now, and it's as we had alluded to earlier, these conditions are sort of interlinked. When you start on the path of one, you can develop the other. So metabolic disease will inevitably lead to risk factors that develop cardiovascular disease, which will both combined lead to risk factors that can cause cognitive decline, and that can also lead to metabolic being obese is a risk factor for having developing cancer as well. So in this slide, you can see me there doing a VO2 max test very poorly. But essentially, what we need to do in cardiovascular disease, again, is institute some factors that can try and help. So from a nutrition point of view, salt. And we know that there is a lot of salt in our food. Some is hidden, some is visible. But simply limiting our salt intake. So a study showed that from a high salt intake, which was around 2.2 grams per day versus 0.5 grams a day, if we switched from that 2.2 to 0.5 grams per day, you could have an equivalent blood pressure reduction as if you were adding in a blood pressure medication, which is pretty significant. Not only that, but weight loss. If you were to, for every 1 kilogram of weight loss, you can get about a millimeter of reduction of blood pressure. So if you were to reduce your salt intake and lost about 10 to 12 kilograms of weight, I'm assuming you were overweight in the first place, you've sort of almost added in the equivalent of 2 blood pressure medications worth of blood pressure lowering interventions just from your lifestyle alone. So that is a significant thing that we can try to introduce to try to limit your cardiovascular disease. From a fitness point of view, which I'm sure will be talked about later on, but adding in some zone 2 training, some cardiovascular exercise, which basically means training when your heart rate is working just above the comfortable zone where you can still complete sentences, but you're working hard enough. And doing that regularly has been shown to also have massive benefits for the cardiovascular system, building out our aerobic capacity. And we know that those that have a higher VO2 max have a longer health span and lifespan, especially seen in athletes. In terms of medications, there are new medications, and we know just linearly, the lower our LDL cholesterol, the lower the risk of cardiovascular disease and the lower the risk of major adverse cardiovascular events like heart attacks and strokes. So we can use those diagnostics that Verity alluded to earlier on to decide how aggressively to lower the lipids, and it may not be the same for everyone. So for some people, they may have a family history, they may be smokers, they may have just a genetic predisposition by having a higher level of lipoprotein A, which decides how sticky their cholesterol molecules can be, and therefore they may need a more aggressive strategy to reduce their cholesterol levels. I'll move on a little bit just for the interests of time. But in terms of neurodegenerative conditions, so here you can see a big one, sleep, and that's not often talked about. And actually, it can impact all of these horsemen that we've talked about today, but specifically neurodegenerative disease. How many times have you seen people sacrificing sleep to try to work as hard as they possibly can, juggling hundreds of different things at the expense of sleep and feeling tired throughout their day? That then leads them to reach for quick energy snacks, unhealthy things to try and provide energy for the rest of the day to fuel them, which then fuels metabolic syndrome, which then fuels cardiovascular disease. So it's all linked together. And the glymphatic system is a system that clears neurofibrillary tangles and tau proteins and amyloid proteins that build up that lead to Alzheimer's disease and dementia. And we know that by sleeping, that works more efficiently. In terms of nutrition, again, eating healthy by reducing saturated fats, increasing our intake of vegetables. There's a diet called the MIND diet, which you can look into and specifically has shown some degree of evidence to try and lower the risk of Alzheimer's disease. We know about the benefits of fitness and exercises that have shown that, just a simple introduction of aerobic exercise a couple of times a week has been shown to improve brain factors, and in some cases has shown enlargement of the hippocampus, which is the area that is associated with memory, and even in patients who are older. So that is a significant benefit from the cardiovascular perspective. And managing modifiable risk factors for individuals is really important. So the best way you can sort of control your risk of Alzheimer's and neurodegenerative conditions is by controlling the same things that we would do for cardiovascular and metabolic disease. Keep your blood pressure low, keep your weight levels low, and do regular fitness exercises has actually been shown to be better than sort of doing your daily Sudoku or your crossword puzzles in terms of helping reduce the risk of neurodegenerative conditions. And then I'll move on to the last slide, which is sort of preventing cancer. And again, very important mention by Richie that actually, yeah, only 5%, less than 10% of cancers are genetically inherited. So there, 1 in 2 of us will get cancer. It's as we live longer, that is also a risk factor. But 4 in 10 cancer cases are preventable. The simple things that we can do by stopping smoking, reducing our alcohol intake, and reducing weight, they sound simple, but just by doing that alone, you are significantly reducing your risk compared to the rest of the population. Of course, most of cancer is about trying to get it early. And we know that the earlier you catch it, the better your outcomes will be. And there are newer tests that we can do to try and catch this early, as well as, engaging in screening programs, engaging in proactive tests, as we mentioned, turning up for your smear test, doing your stool test to check for, is there microscopic amounts of blood in my stool? If you're getting symptoms early, just making sure that you have a set of labs, making sure that you've seen your doctor and you're regularly up to date. And if anything runs in your family, making sure you pay more attention to that. So ultimately, there are a number of different things that we can do, and all of these are sort of overlinked. And you'll see that actually a lot of the interventions are quite similar for each area, but ultimately they are all interlinked, and there is a significant amount that we can do to try and target them.
Thank you very much, Umair. So as you've all heard, the theme is common. You have to be the right weight, you have to eat the right things, you have to avoid the wrong things, and you actually land up preventing cardiovascular disease, neurovascular disease, and even cancer. But, people say, Umair, that they've heard ad nauseum about all these 5 things, diet, exercise, sleep, nutrition, diet, exercise, sleep, and drugs, and supplements, and emotional therapy, and keeping happy. What about anti-aging drugs? We keep hearing about metformin, we keep hearing about hyperbaric oxygen therapy. So, Vritti, do you want to take us through whether you think there is any anti-aging magic in metformin and hyperbaric oxygen therapy? And then stay tuned, Umair, we're going to ask you about 2 others. So, I think you just here, right?
Yeah, it's audible. So yeah, there is some, so there's a lot of work happening. In fact, when we talk about metformin has shown stark results in terms of people who were on metformin for diabetes also, they live longer as compared to people who were not on metformin, and that's where all of this started. Because what it does is, metformin basically improves your sensitivity to insulin, and obviously insulin is a good thing to be in at the right time. And a lot of it was, so it's obviously there's a huge study happening, and that is why metformin right now has been introduced for off-label use. It's not available as a ready prescription. There are studies happening to evaluate if there are any side effects to this drug if given for healthy individuals. Now, obviously, giving for diabetics is very straightforward, but giving a drug in a healthy individual, there's a TAME study that's happening just on to evaluate that. But yes, metformin is definitely showing very positive promises, in the sense that yes, it seems to be, if it is on, we will be able to reverse both in men and women. But yes, there are a few risk factors which I'm not tabling here, but yeah. And hyperbaric oxygen.
So if people wanted to go on metformin and they are otherwise normal, they don't have diabetes, are there any adverse effects? I mean, why should I not take metformin and make myself longer and healthier?
Now, there have been very remote cases where there have been early, specifically in women, there has been detection of cancer. Incidence has been found to increase. So obviously, we still do not know. So what they're saying at the moment is that, you keep yourself completely monitored. Do not take metformin. So you start low dose, start like a 500 mg kind of a thing, and do not take it every day. Take it, take it in pulses. So I mean, obviously, there is a lot of caution there.
So as long as you're getting your health checks done routinely,
yes.
If you want to experiment with things like metformin, with the rider that it's not completely scientifically approved everywhere in the world, go for it.
I agree.
What about oxygen, hyperbaric oxygen therapy? Should you just lock yourself up for 2 hours a day and you live like 150 years.
Yeah. 5 decades added to your lifetime, 7 decades from 80 to 150. Well, hyperbaric oxygen therapy, again, there's a lot of good things that have come out with this therapy. Basically, what you're doing is you're locking yourself in a chamber and you're getting exposed to high concentrated oxygen. Now, that has shown a definitive anti-inflammatory, and as we said, because this is basically inflammation, chronic inflammation syndrome, which sets in the whole body that leads to aging. That's aging. So when we go into such a chamber for an hour, and obviously not every day, but yes, there are again studies happening around it. It has shown definitive proven benefits for osteoarthritis kind of things. It has shown benefits in cancer. It has shown benefits even for metabolic syndrome. So it has shown divided ways. It has shown proven benefits, and obviously there is a regime to be followed under proper medical supervision. But yes, again, it is there making, it's really making very tall promises and should be standing to its test.
What about, Umair, what about resveratrol and rapamycin? These are the two other names floating around in the longevity world.
Yeah. Okay. So, again, I would caveat these with, unless we're instituting all the other factors that we discussed earlier on, this is sort of the cherry or the icing on the top of the cake for a very limited few people that have got every other thing right. In terms of resveratrol, I don't think that there is enough evidence really to recommend this. There's a specific group of people that are proponents of this, but I think over time the evidence has shown that it doesn't really add up to much in terms of the longevity benefits. There was some evidence in the initial study of a group of mice that were not heterogeneous in nature, as it was expanded by the interventions testing program, which is a body that sort of tests all compounds that could have some promise in terms of anti-aging interventions. It sort of didn't really replicate its early promise, and therefore I just don't feel that it would add very much value. The absorption is actually quite poor as well in an oral form, and therefore to gain any benefit, even if there was some, you would have to take very, very high doses of it, which we don't know whether or not there are side effects. It was acquired by a major pharmaceutical company. And I believe they have shelved their investigation of it because it just really didn't live up to much in the end. So personally, I'm not a fan of resveratrol. Rapamycin, however, is a bit of an older compound. It was discovered in around about the 60s from Rapa Nui, which is an island, and was shown to have some essentially found because people visited that island when they were sick, and they would sort of touch the soil and start to feel better. So it was seen as sort of a miraculous compound. It has obviously been used, and Dr. Soin, you'll probably be aware, in transplant surgeries, people who've had renal transplants, it's used to sort of suppress the immune system so that the organs can be accepted. Now, how do we think that this sort of medication could benefit us? Well, actually, it has shown in multiple life forms, rodents, worms, that it can, and in yeast, that it can enhance lifespan in all of these organisms. Now, does that extend to humans? We don't know. The humans, we live a lot longer, so it takes about 80 years and 100 years to find out. And these organisms live sort of 3 years, from a couple of months to a few years. So it has shown promise. But would I recommend someone take it now? Probably not. I think that you have to get everything else right. There are some immune suppressive effects of it, so we have a higher risk of infections. And I think we just need more data. And there are trials that are ongoing looking at the effects of this on various important factors. But I think it's to keep an eye on. It definitely is promising, but maybe a bit early to pull the trigger just yet.
So thanks. So obviously, resveratrol not ready for prime time. Rapamycin, little more promise, but it has some side effects. And believe me, I use it every day on transplant patients. And in fact, there was an interesting study that questioned the enhanced survival with rapamycin in a certain cohort of transplant patients on its anti-aging effect versus its immunosuppressive effect. This was like published 4 or 5 years ago, not recent. I mean, not very recent. So I think the research is still on, and don't pop these pills. These are not over-the-counter anti-aging pills, so stay away. But lifestyle, yes, please adopt healthy lifestyle modifications. So Prashant, will turn to you. It's clear that you need dedicated centers and institutions that promote wellness and positive health. I have some figures from the US. So the longevity ventures funding has gone up to 4 billion plus in the US in 2022. And the anti-aging drugs and longevity drugs market is actually totally exploding. And that's in the US. And when I compared the mortality figures of what happens in the US to kill people versus what happens in India, it's very similar, except for TB, which is 10% of mortality, but everything else is very similar, like I showed you in the earlier slide. So do you think these institutions need to come up in India? And the reason I ask you is, guys, Prashant is a leading early investor in longevity in India. He believes in the longevity story of India. So tell us about how investors look at this. What boxes do you have to tick to get money to start these centers?
Thank you, Suman. I think it's more like 7 billion over there. Just Altos Labs got 3.5 billion in 2022. So it's a different orbit there. But I think in longevity, there are broadly investing, there's two spaces in my mind. There's longevity now, and then there's longevity now, and then there is longevity next, right? So longevity now is where I would put maybe these three large areas. One is the longevity clinics you spoke about. I think there's a blurring of lines between the pharmaceuticals and nutraceuticals. So I would put that as second area that we are investing in. The third area is devices for red light therapies, mitochondrial health, hyperbaric, all of these areas, right? And there's a fourth area, which is the most fertile area for investing, which is skin, right? So if you ask me where has everybody made money in anti-aging today, it is in skin. And whether you believe it or not, if there is one area where age reversal has been demonstrated, it is with skin, right? So let's
so right, because you may look very fit and you may be absolutely healthy, but if you look like an old hag, then people will still not know that you're actually healthy inside.
Yeah, and
important to look good, I guess.
And there have been actually trials done where they've looked at, what does the feeling of how you look do to your healthy longevity or health span. It makes a difference. So anyway, that's a whole nother discussion. But I think what's the difference between a longevity clinic and, functional medicine doctors have been there forever. Preventive health has been there forever. What's the difference, right? I think there are two big differences. One, it's the business model, right? The business model is predicated on this idea of membership, right? Why membership? Membership is very important because you need to have longitudinal ownership of your client or your, in this case, not a patient really, somebody that you're working with, right?
I like to call them wellness seekers.
Yeah, wellness seekers. Now, longitudinal ownership is, is not inherent in our health system, which is very sick care and episodic. I mean, that's the way we kind of look at our in that care patients. And in that case. So I think the membership model is something that is popular now and also called as concierge medicine, whatever. And there's enough proof that these are very, very here and now revenue models. So I think you will get a lot of early money in India go into this area. And you will see a lot of longevity clinics mushroom. But the problem is, are people really going to do justice to this 3 Ps, right? This idea of personalization, this idea of being preventive, and this idea of being participative. And when I say participative, one of the big problems with the current health system and why it's not possible within a hospital is because of the silos, right? So what's the difference between the way a longevity clinic would work? I think the number of domains that you take ownership of for this wellness seeker is very different from what happens in a typical hospital setting, right?
So true, true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that is one difference at a very fundamental level. The second difference at a fundamental level is the idea that you got to get to the cellular level now, right? So the multi-omics driven, systems domain engineering. I mean, I know I come from an engineering background, and now I finally feel good that
We're going to ask you about that later.
No, I mean, I think, see, engineering, I mean, looking at your body, or the whole body as an engineer, at a systems domain level is becoming more and more important. So that's why I think there's a bigger convergence. So it's really not about AI. It's about systems thinking. So people kind of overemphasize, see, AI, there is no magic in AI. I think there is magic in how you look at the whole system, right? And how you look at the significant amount of interrelationships. I mean, you just spoke about the aging hallmarks, right? I mean, when you look at deeply into those hallmarks, you would just understand the complexity lies from the interrelationships between those hallmarks, right?
So
and that requires a systems domain approach.
Let's dwell on another point. All of us, please stand up, everyone that has health insurance. Everyone who has health insurance, right? Okay, please sit down. Now let's stand up those of us who have cover for preventive and predictive healthcare. There's not a single person. So what am I trying to say? What I'm trying to say is insurance companies need to pull up their socks, get their act together, fund people with low premiums to safeguard their health, to stay healthy, to stay well, and that's low cost. Rather than pay 10 lakhs, 15 lakhs for a transplant or pay 8 lakhs for a cardiac bypass, doesn't it make sense? Prashant, what do you think? Should the insurance companies cover preventive health?
100%. I think once you have that ownership, so in fact, I'm seeing this new concept which goes beyond just the idea of a longevity clinic. It's the idea of a family health office. You know, let me ask, how many of you have wealth managers managing your wealth in this?
There may be more, but people are not ready to admit it.
Yeah, so maybe, yeah. So, but we don't have, but really this idea of having a family health office and that ownership, I think, is central to being able to risk profile the family, the individual, and provide the right insurance. So that is happening. So there are just 2 companies that have got funded in the US to provide, in conjunction with a longevity clinic, to be able to, because some of these treatments and some of these nutraceuticals are not cheap, right? But they pay off in the long run. I think you spoke about a lot of these, nutraceuticals, I mean, which are, repurposed drugs or some of these areas. But I think there is this need to really personalize, be specific about dosing. There needs to be, so when we talk personalization today, there is no longevity clinic, even in the US, today that can compound and personalize your nutraceuticals, right?
True, very true. I think personalized is really the key word. So now we've all heard about diagnostic tests, standard medical tests and diagnostics, lifestyle modifications, and people want to know if there's some magic deep down in the genome or the cell which scientists like Professor Deepak Saini, who's here with us, who heads the Longevity Institute at IISc Bangalore. You know, Deepak, you have a lot of these really smart scientists and kind of the best research minds in the country working with you on longevity. What are the 3 or 4 exciting areas in cellular research, regenerative medicine, gene therapy, where people can get a single shot or a shot every year and stay young? Is there stuff like that coming through?
I think first, thanks, Avi, for this interesting question. Before I dwell on to your magic pill, let's ask one very simple question. That why are we talking about longevity here at the first place? Why are we worried about longevity? I mean, as a human race, is there an evolutionary angle for us to live long? I mean, our lifespan has more or less stayed constant. People say, why are we don't live like tortoise for 200 plus years, right? So if you think about human being is a very interesting species. It's not the strongest, right? If you look around, there are species which are stronger. It's definitely not the fastest. So that means from an evolutionary angle, survival of human being is actually a miracle which we survive because of our brains, but also because we are resilient. We could figure out that there could be no food tomorrow, or there could be abundance of food tomorrow. So we went through this cycle of starvation and rich diet. And I'll tell you where I'm going to come ultimately. You might like that aspect. But if you go by this resilience cycle, that means over the selection of human as a race or a species, we were selected for genes which makes us resilient, which means we were trained to undergo cycling of nutrition to maximize our survival. That also means that we were not trained to have abundant food. So ultimately we're coming out that this abundance of food which we currently are facing, basically we have fought off starvation and nutrition paucity. We have fought off all the infectious disease. The only next big hurdle for us is living longer. And from that angle, we're coming back to the same aspect, that how does our body utilize this abundance of nutrition? So it's all about metabolic health. And that's what longevity in the long term for all of us is going to be, that how we manage our metabolic health. So where is the wonderful drug, molecule, gene therapy is going to come from? It's going to come from a simple idea that what can we do to improve your metabolism? And metabolism means how do we use available resources, resilient usage of resources. We were not trained to use this much sugar. Actually, nature is very interesting design of things. It makes things which we need in enough quantity easily available. Those which do not need enough quantity makes them more sparse or difficult to get by. So if you look around you, wheat, rice, which are our staple diets, actually are so difficult to extract from the plant because you need to dehusk, you need to remove, you have to powder and everything. Whereas the fruits and vegetables are easily accessible. So now if you think very carefully, what we are doing is we are consuming which nature does not design us to consume more, which is making us undergo that metabolic shift or transition from fight to survive, now to eat to live. That's what's happening. So where is the therapy going to come from? I think every molecule which we have talked about, metformin, rapamycin, or resveratrol, every molecule hits upon a central metabolic axis in our body. How do you use our sugar or calories in your body? How much protein, fat, carbohydrate do you need to consume to stay fit or live long is going to affect you. So in our fundamental research which we do, as we said, we have a great team. Somebody is looking at ovarian health, somebody is looking at pancreatic health, we look at lung health. There's only one feature which actually improves quality of that organ, just give them less sugar. So basically caloric restriction is only known evidence. I think the people here will agree that only known evidence of living long is restrict calorie. But I've also been told by a lot of people, I mean on a passing by, that no fun living that way. So I think longevity is battling fun and it's not going to be easy. But from a gene therapy perspective, we are far away from that. The reason being, there are so many genes in our body which are geared towards resilience, making us a better human being. So removing one or improving one gene function is not going to be a simple solution. So improving quality of life, health span, is going to be a multifactorial process. It would involve improving your lifestyle, improving your nutritional uptake, and also giving support for what is missing in your body. So I think that's where a lot of our fundamental research is also aimed at.
So you talked about missing all the fun if you know, go on a specific diet and don't eat the things that you love. I mean, Manveer, do you think we can reprogram the brain to like things which are good for us? I mean, it's just a off-the-beat question. Manveer is a well-known neurologist and a sleep specialist.
So in fact, I was going to take that cue when he said that life is not worth living if you don't eat well. All the people that I see, if I tell them to stick to some kind of a schedule for sleep, they say life is not worth living. So how can you expect us to go to bed by 11, 12? So that's the whole culture. So I was thinking it's youngsters, but it's starting late. It starts around class 10, but it's going on to 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. So there's a huge science which is called as a circadian rhythm science. And the scientists who believe or who are followers and researching on that, they feel the root cause of all our problems, the metabolic syndrome, our wrong choices for food, why do we eat, why do we get craving, what's happening to the satiety centers, is all because of our mismatch of our circadian science. And, you know, so we can talk a little bit more about that. But that's
So you actually come on with your expertise now and tell us how important is good quality and quantity of sleep for rejuvenation of the physical and the mental self. And all of us have had sleep problems sometime in our lives, or probably will do. Lucky are those who haven't had any.
Yeah.
So tell us how to get good sleep and what good sleep does to us.
Yes, so I think, you know, over the years, there has been a lot of focus on nutrition and exercise. But the last few decades, I mean, US and Europe are definitely waking up to sleep in a very big way. And with the finances and investors here, the sleep is growing as a leaps and bounds in the billion-dollar industry. Because everything related to sleep, whether it is from the environment, to the beds, to the sheets, to the mattresses, his and her sides of the pillow, the mattress. One side becomes cool, one side becomes warm. So I went and lay on them. It's like amazing what all is happening.
Earthing mattresses.
Earthing mattresses. No, my choice mattress, my number mattress. So all that is happening. So anyway, so that's where we are. So if, I think the lights are very dim at the back. So the audience at the back is definitely, it's very conducive to dozing off, we say. Dim lights, monotonous voice, some people talking, some people only listening. So let's see when Dr. Soin asked this question about quantity and quality of sleep. So let's say who gets more than 7 hours of sleep per night? Okay, so that's about, how much percent? About 60? Who gets less than 6 hours?
Let's stand up. No?
Okay, let's stand up. Less than 6 hours. No, I get more, so I'm not standing up.
Less than 6 hours. No.
So less than 6, is it? So now, so that's how much the range is, you know, but what does the science tell us? The science tells us that we need about 7 to 8 hours, but like everything, like, you know, you have food, regulation, similarly you have sleep. So there are some people who need less, some need more. So quantity is pretty easy to estimate that you get this hours. About quality, so how do we test about quality? How many people feel rested, fresh, ready to go, happy when they wake up in the morning? Let's stand up again. How many people feel rested, happy, fresh, ready to go?
This table?
This table is not. The whole idea is that they are not. So, okay, so the other way around, the rest, let's see who stands up when they are not rested, when you wake up in the morning, not feeling good. Some lights in the audience, please. Okay, so we don't have the mics there, but we would like to know from somebody right in the front. So what do you feel when you wake up in the morning? What's the...
Can we circulate a mic in the audience, please?
So what is it that you feel? So if you're not rested, happy, ready to go, what are the feelings that you get? Anybody who got up and said, I'm not rested. Just what do you feel? So we will, anxiety, okay, any more? Stress? Sorry? Craving for food? Bad decisions. Okay, so this is exactly what it is. This is what a poor quality sleep does. So what is this? And how do we measure quality? This is exactly. So people come with data to me for months and start downloading and sending me by email. This is my Fitbit, this is my Apple Watch. People are wearing 3 and telling you, okay, this is what's happening. You know what's happening? No, doctor, you don't understand. I'm getting no REM sleep. So how do you know? My Fitbit tells me, or my Aura tells me, or my Whoop tells me. So that's the era that we are in. But in simple terms, when we go through sleep, we are not in one stage. Like I tell people that you're not unconscious and you wake up. You go through these different stages. Just to suffice that for an adult, we have enough knowledge how much time we should spend in deep sleep or in REM sleep. And this is called all of them together is called one cycle. We have normally 4 to 5 such cycles. It's been studied a lot extensively about this thing called as sleep deprivation. You know, we won't get into it right now, but sleep deprivation basically means that you are getting less sleep than the amount that you need. So this could be voluntary, which almost 60% of the time people are not able to shut the Netflix off. It's got a very strong pull, you know, so before they know it, they have reached 4 a.m., 5 a.m. I just saw in the last week, I was thinking I will share some cases. There are children or 20s, 30s who are sleeping at 5, 6, 7 a.m. The clock has totally got shifted and they are waking up at 2 p.m. This girl is trying to study for some exams. Whole day there's brain fog and she's not able to function. So this is the quality of sleep that we are talking about. The third aspect which I touched briefly, something called as timing of sleep. So a lot of youngsters now, and even adults I would say, are all convinced that I need 7 hours. But they say that it's irrespective of what time I sleep, as long as I get my 7 hours. We have excellent information about what happens to the body at 11 p.m., midnight, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 a.m. So those in that time, some people who called up saying that we are stressed and anxious, at night our cortisol system, our excitatory system is supposed to go down. But if we stay awake, we have heightened our excitatory system. We are all the time in this supercharged mode. So that's what's going to harm. And I think a lot of the faculty here, panelists said about a chronic inflammatory state, metabolic syndrome, the root cause of lots of things, and that actually now the sleep physicians believe that the root cause of all this is poor sleep. Because sleep deprivation because of any cause, whether voluntary or a disorder or snoring or sleep apnea, you have activated the inflammatory system in your body. And that's, you know, where we are heading, is because that's how the links are coming in all this, you know, so there was, I'll just say this one quote, which I just recently from another physician, not mine, who said very nicely that think about sleep as the soil and the plant is your life. So you may pour into it good nutrition, good water, good sunlight, exercise, but if the soil is not healthy, the plant will die or not survive and or live a healthy life. So I think that quote was, you know, I just heard it the other day from a good physician. So I said, let me just stress the importance of this entity. Should I just finish that brain part? So just to share what happens in the brain. The picture with the red is showing you that's at night. There is the doctor from the Hook Clinic also, Umair talked about it. There is a system in our body which cleans up the system. So there's research now that blood flow at night, not blood flow, sorry, the G lymphatic system wipes away the junk. So this cartoon I show because it kind of leaves an impression that there is vacuum cleaning, housekeeping, whatever word you want to keep in your mind, is happening at night. When we are sleeping at the right time, not at night when you sleep in the middle of the day. So that cleaning removes all the junk that is accumulating. If not, you will get a room like this and the brain will get full of clutter, and that's why we get, now it's become a risk factor for cognitive impairment and dementia. And when I see people who are saying, I can't remember, the first thing we say is, how was your night? So the memory has to get stored, it has to get recollected, all that gets hampered. So imagine another cartoon which we show is that, think about it, that from a USB drive, it has to go into a hard disk. And that happens at night. So you get the information, but there is no storage. So when there is no storage, there is no recall. And people are getting very worried about it, that I'm forgetting all the time, because there's too much information overload, not adequate cleaning, and not adequate storage. And this is just the last bit we talked, so I wanted to also talk about the emotions. And I think somebody said anxious, I don't know if somebody said angry. So why is one angry? So there's a lot of neurobehavioral thought on this anger. And another thing the sleep scientists say is that in this era of sleep deprivation, we are more obese and we are more angry as a race. So there's a small little almond-shaped structure called amygdala. It's right at the center. It's like a firing system which controls the emotions, particularly anger, and your responsiveness and irritability and things like that. The pink part in the front is the part here, the brain. That's where actually the human beings, we've got more evolved, because this part of our brain is very evolved as compared to all during the evolution, which is like a brake on that amygdala. So if you are upset, you are angry, so sometimes you're able to control yourself, sometimes you can't, you just let loose. So that brake is working well if you are able to control. How does sleep get into it? It's been shown that the brakes work very well if you are well rested. If you are sleep deprived, that brake function goes away. And then the amygdala just takes off. So that's the other area, that empathy, kindness, in fact even charity, ability to recognize the other person's facial expressions is all coming if you are very well rested. If not, you are on your own zone and there's no empathy. So I think that's what I want to end with.
No, but you can't go away, because you've said a lot of things which bring further questions. So, there are certain countries in the world where the presidents are supposed to be cognitively challenged at 80 years of age. How can we not be like that? So how do you have good cognition well into the 80s and 90s? Anything else apart from, you said sleeping so that your USB stuff goes into the hard drive and is stored. What are the other tricks to actually keep cognition going late into nearly 100 years?
Yeah, so you're right. So there's a lot of focus now on something called as the brain health. So the World Federation of Neurology, the World Academy of Neurology, everybody's talking about brain health. So there was this whole thing about cardiac health a few years ago. Cardiac health was considered, there was a Life's Essential 7, and about 2-3 years ago, the American Heart Association made it Life's Essential 8 and added sleep to it. So that's one part. So brain health is actually similar to what all normal health they were talking about. First is to take care of the risk factors. And that is all medical comorbid illnesses like diabetes, blood pressure, please treat. Because it's been seen that they produce small little clots in the brain, which may not cause big strokes, but they will impair the connectivity. So billions of neurons are continuously in connection, networks we call them, so they will get impaired, and that's why the cognitive impairment will come. So control those. Second is, of course, take care of these three vital things, the three pillars as they are called, the nutrition, exercise, and sleep. Third, which is gaining a lot of importance now, I think especially this post-COVID, it's even risen because we have seen devastating results on the mental health with the COVID, is a social connection. So that social connection is not phone connection, it's not WhatsApp connection, it's face-to-face connections, meeting each other. So half the people I'm telling, when the elders come and they come with their, the kids or the whatever, so I tell them that please, once in a week, once in 15 days, take some outing for them, what they want, whether it's a lunch, whether it's a tea, whether they want, and the ones who are playing cards, for instance, are doing really well. So 80s may they are playing cards. So social connection and learn something new. So this learn something new has become like one big thing. Everybody is doing Sudoku at night. So we are not saying do Sudoku at night, do something which you enjoy. The bigger factor is that I need to be enjoying what I need to do, then my brain will work much better and you will release really nice chemicals, so which are going to be keeping you healthy.
Thank you. And now we've been saving the best for the last. We have Saurabh Khushroshahi here. He's a corporate lawyer turned fitness enthusiast, but he actually believes in fitness in a more holistic sense and for the long haul. So Saurabh, tell us, how does one continue to hike when you're 90 years old, or be able to carry 2 suitcases when you're in your 90s, or run the treadmill, or climb 2 flights of stairs when you're in your 80s? How does one make that happen? How do you build up muscle strength, mobility, and stamina for the long haul?
How long do we have? I need more of that.
You have 5 minutes, but
Okay.
we have the next 30 years, right? We all decided that.
Yeah. Okay. I am supposed to talk about fitness, and you've obviously put a lot of pressure on me by saying best for the last. So I'm going to try. One of the biggest problems we have today. This one better? Yeah. One of the biggest problems we have today as a generation or as people is exactly what we've done in this room. We spent the last 1 hour and everyone's sitting down. Not a single person has moved. Not a single person has stood up. We stood up a couple of times. We forced them to stand up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of have my conversation standing up, okay? Now, when it comes down to fitness, right? When it comes down to, and we've had Umair talk about it, Ms. Bhatia spoke about a very interesting topic, which is sleep, which is something that's very dear to me. I'm not very good at it, I'll admit that, but I'm trying. Being a corporate lawyer for 15 years, that takes a toll on your sleep. And I was a capital markets lawyer, which means we were just constantly working. Now, fitness, right? I have slides, but I'm going to kind of talk to you guys more than use the slides. And I'm going to make you get up a lot through the next 5 minutes, so bear with me. Fitness, right? I look at fitness differently. No, I'm good. Oh, sorry. Okay, there you go. Fitness. What is fitness to an individual? Right? What constitutes you being fit or being unfit? Everyone has a different connotation. Everyone has a different answer. For some people, and this is my least favorite answer, is how much they weigh, right? You equate fitness with just how much that number on the weighing scale is. Now, Doctor touched upon a very interesting topic, which is sleep. Everyone has touched upon some interesting topics, and so has Umair. For me, there are a few aspects to fitness, right? It's not one thing. There's no one thing. I mean, if I come from my generation or I come from my mom's generation, it was all about walking, cardiovascular health. How much do we walk every day? How many steps do we take? What do we do there, right? The newer generation, it's gone on to strength training to a certain aspect, and I think that's very important. Human beings, we lose muscle every year, right? And after a certain age, we lose muscle at a faster rate. According to me, and I was having this discussion with Sir just before we started this panel, I think muscle is your most important organ. may have a lot of people who disagree with me, but I think it's your most important organ. It's where everything happens. And your metabolic health starts with your muscles. It's very important that you have certain amount of muscle. Now, I'm going to ask you a very simple question. I'm going to ask you to stand up, so I apologize. How many of you all in this room actually strength train or do some form of resistance training at least 2 times a week? Stand up. That's not even 50%, right?
20.
We look at about 20 to 30%. How many of you all go for a walk every day? Or let's say 3 to 4 times a week. So this is much better, right? So that's where I'm kind of coming to, right? We look at how much we walk, and for us, walking is exercise. I hate to break it to you, walking is not exercise. Sorry, that's my opinion. So when I talk to my mom sometimes, and God bless her, she's 81 years old, and she talks to me about the fact that she has exercised, and I'm like, yeah, what did you do? And she's like, I went for a walk. I'm like, I'm sorry, not exercise. I meet a lot of people who tell me I train 5 times a week. I'm like, great. What do you do 5 times a week? I go for a walk for 1 hour every day. Sorry, that's not exercise. In my book, that's not exercise. So I think every individual at some level has to have some form of resistance training or strength training as part of their weekly schedule. Now, if you're someone who doesn't do it regularly, I'd say at least a couple of times a week. I'm not asking you to suddenly become Mr. World. No. I'm just saying go in a couple of times a week and do some basic strength work. And honestly, I think the older we get, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, we need it even more. I think the mindset's slightly different. We believe that 20-year-olds and 30-year-olds need to do it, but I think 50, 60, 70-year-olds need to do it even more. And that's what me and my team kind of focus on. We've got a bunch of students who are over the age of 65. My first student ever, when I made the switch from being a lawyer to kind of coaching, was a 63-year-old gentleman called Mr. Ajay Piramal, a founder, head of Piramal Industries. One of the most amazing people I have met in my life, because at the age of 64, he used to get up and go to the gym 3 times a week at 5:30 in the morning, without fail. And I love him to bits, but at that time I used to curse him because I'm like, you're making me wake up at 4:30 in the morning to come to you at 5:30. So different aspects. Now, there's 2 more aspects, or 1 more aspect of fitness which I think people ignore, which is your recovery. And that breaks into sleep and nutrition, right? We believe we're training, we believe we're doing really well, but we don't really focus on our food. And from what I saw right now, we don't even focus on our sleep. And to me, that's more important than what you do in terms of exercise. So everyone's different. So I left you with one thing, right? I said you've got to try and get strength training in twice a week. Everybody in this room, irrespective of your age, right? The second thing I would urge you to do is actually listen to Dr. Bhatia and get some sleep in. And I'm one of those who came from that era where we were like, oh, we're cool if we don't sleep. I'm sorry, that was a thing that happened. Sleep is a waste of time. I'm wasting my life by sleeping. I've heard a lot of that, right? And I've told that to myself a lot of times when I was a lawyer. I'm like, what am I going to achieve by sleeping? I'll have a few years to sleep later. It doesn't work, right? It kind of causes complications in your own health and in your own system. Another topic, and I'll be very brief about it, is nutrition, right? How many people in this room actually track the amount of protein you have on a daily basis? Stand up. I'm not making you sit down. Stand up. Okay. How many of y'all, you can sit back down. Okay, just stand up since you'll track your protein. Stand up. The ones who track their protein, stand up. Stand up. How many of y'all, and if the answer to this is no, sit down, have at least 1.4 to 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight? If you don't, sit down. Or you do. Excellent. That's brilliant. But that is 10 people in this audience, right? So I think the easiest thing when it comes to food, and something I'd love everybody to look at, is how much protein are they consuming. And it's a very big problem in the Indian diet. right? Because a lot of the Indian diet is rice, rotis, dals, but we don't really focus on how much protein we get in. And I'll come to that topic on protein in 2 minutes because I think it's a very important topic, and Umair touched upon it as well. Now, I'm going to ask you to kind of do, I talked to Dr. Soin, and we were going to do this in the audience, but I think it'll be unfortunate if we do this in the audience. People might kill me. Okay, so I want you to go home and do these 2 things, right? These 2 things are very important. How many people, or try this, right? It's a basic mobility test. I think mobility is also very important when it comes to training. How many people can actually sit down on the ground, cross-legged, and get up without using your hands? I'm not going to ask you to try it right now, okay? It might be a disaster. We might cause a lot of chaos. So I'm not going to ask you to try that. I love you for it. I swear I do. In a suit? I was going to do it, but...
Not alone.
Okay, the ones who said they can, come. Anyone wants to demo it? Anyone wants to demo it for me? Sit down and get up without using your hands. Go for it. Excellent. Right? Very, very, very simple mobility test. Would you like to do it, sir? Come, sir. Please. You can try different methods. Yes, that's okay. That's excellent. Thank you very much. Not a lot of people can do that. You'll be surprised. You think this is very easy and everyone should be able to do it, but go home today and try it out, and let's see how many of you all can, right? That's a very, very simple mobility test, something that I would look at from a longevity perspective, right? Doctor touched upon this when he started, and I was having a discussion before the panel started. Longevity is great, but quality of lifespan to me is more important. I might come from a different chain of thought, right? I want to be 80 or 85 or 90 or even 100, but I don't want anyone to help me do the basic things in life. For me, that is longevity. And that improves, yes, there are a bunch of medicines that you can take, and we've spoken about a lot of things here. But that improves with something very simple. It starts from within you, right? Can you eat well? Can you sleep well? Can you train regularly? Do these few things first before we go into the drugs and the preventive and everything, because this is preventive in my book, right? Second thing, I do this every day. I don't know how many of you all do it. When I sit down with my kids and eat, I sit cross-legged on the floor and eat. How many of you all do that? How many of you all do that? Stand up. You're going to keep standing up in my talk. That's great, but that's not even 50% of this crowd, right? As kids, when I was in school, I think we used to have a canteen and we used to sit on the ground and eat with our table or our desk. And that was actually brilliant. If you go back to rural India, you'll see they don't have knee problems. They don't have hip problems. They don't have any of these issues. They have the Indian toilet. They squat down. They sit down, right? That's it. They don't sit on chairs. And I think it's important. So what I try and do every day is try to get 10 to 15 minutes of sitting cross-legged on the floor. That changes your health as well. That changes your mobility. And when you change stuff like that, you improve the quality of your life. And for me, quality of life matters way more than how long I live. I'm sorry, I know that might be controversial, but for me, quality of life matters way more than how long I live. One more thing before I kind of move out and give the stage to everyone else. This is something I hear a lot of in my life as a coach, right? What's your purpose? Why do you train, right? I'm not an athlete. Why should I train like an athlete, right? In my opinion, life is your biggest athletic event. It's an athletic event. You've got to kind of look at things differently. We always, I've met so many people who come to me and say, but I'm not training for the Olympics. Why are you pushing me so much? You're training for life. And I think it's very important that everyone has a purpose in everything we do, whether that's work, life, training, fitness, longevity. You've got to have a purpose. You've got to have something you look forward to. For me, that kind of gets you what you want to get. Now, I'll tell you what my purpose is or what my idea of fitness is. And I'm happy if any one of you all want to share that, your own purpose. For me, it's about living a life that is meaningful. 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 It's about I became a father at a slightly late age. My second son was born when I was 40, right? Now, when he's 20, wants to play a sport, he seems to be keen on sport already. But when he wants to play a sport at 20, I'll be about 60, right? He can't be better than me, I'm sorry. Doesn't work. It could be any sport. I played cricket at the under-19s, the under-17s, the under-23s for my state. There's no chance he's beating me at cricket. There's no chance he's going to be better than me. For me, that is fitness. I don't care about the way I look. I don't care about whether I have abs. I don't care how thin I am or what my weight is. For me, fitness is the ability to do what you want to do when you want to do it without second-guessing yourself. And when fitness becomes that, and you get that as a purpose, life changes, right? And then you kind of start working on yourself a lot more. I can go on about this topic. I'm sorry, it's the most important topic for me. But I'm going to kind of finish off with a few myths. I promise you I will be done in 30 seconds. I promise you. Okay? The first thing, it's right up on the screen. Cardio is your answer to every single health issue you ever have. I don't agree with it. I think that, like I've already touched upon, strength training is a very important aspect of your fitness and your health as well. Second point is the most important one, the one I see a lot of, is women should not strength train because they look big or they look bulky or they look like men. That's the worst thing I've heard. The only people who tell women they look like men when they strength train, in my opinion, are insecure men. Right? It just doesn't make sense to me. There is no reason why a woman should not strength train. And a woman will not look bulky. You do not have enough testosterone in your body to get bulky that fast, unless you're doing something on the side. Now that I'm not going to touch upon. And my last thing, and I've already touched upon this, is protein is not safe for you. It's perfectly safe. I have met parents who have come to me and said, my son wants to have a protein shake, and isn't that unsafe for him? Isn't that going to hurt him? I was like, oh, okay, fine. Does your son have ice cream? Yeah. Does your son have diet sodas? 100%. What's the problem with that? But protein's an issue, right? I don't get it. It doesn't make sense to me. So that's my 2 bits about what you wanted me to talk about. Hopefully that made a little bit of sense, and hopefully you'll take something back home. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Saurabh. Now, let's move on to, before we conclude, and then we open the floor for questions, let's move on to another very interesting concept in longevity, and that's blue zones. A lot of you have probably heard of blue zones. Blue zones are 5 regions of the world which have the maximum concentration of centenarians, people who live to 100 or more, and they live healthy. And delving into their lifestyle gives a lot of insight into what it takes to actually get there. So before we ask Vritti she herself has visited a blue zone, so she's researched blue zones, so she'll tell us what they're all about and how we can incorporate the good bits of living in blue zones in our own daily lives. We'll just do a couple of quick votes. So in terms of happiness and purpose, one of the good things that you can do is stay in the moment. That means all your worries and all your angst about the past and the future should rest aside, and you should live in the moment. And the popular activities that you can do are music, meditation, sports. They all help you to live in the moment. So how many of us do activities that help you live in the moment, sports, music, meditation, any other, at least 1 hour a day? Okay, 2 hours a day, keep standing, the rest sit down. Wow. We salute you and you. Right. So Vritti, tell us about blue zones.
And the slide. So Dr. Soin just spoke about blue zones. Yeah, there's a sneak peek there. There are the 5 blue zones in the world.
I visited myself Sardinia, Italy as my first destination last year, and I hope to cover rest in next 2 years. Okay, so and each one has a very specific thing that they are bringing on table, but there is a very strong connection. When I read and learned about blue zones, there's a lot that is in common, and I'll quickly come to, yeah, these are my pictures from Sardinia. So I mean, here when you see this first couple is, in the first picture, the couple is, they're both husband wife, and they are both 86. The lady is 82 and the husband is 86, and I visited their house. They were they were extremely warm people. I mean, they had a strong sense of bonding with themselves, with the family, with the neighborhood, with the community. The second family, the lady last in the sequence sitting there, she is 99 years old, and her bedroom is on the second floor. She goes up and down every day to her bedroom. And interestingly, and it was just very unique and different, which was there in our ethos as Indian, in the Indian society, she's still the decision maker of the family. The third one is, now this is a family. There is a husband, wife, and the son. So this was the family that hosted us for dinner, and we saw how their diet, that diet comes from the locals. They do not eat processed foods, and we talk a lot about against the processed food. The most interesting, the beautiful thing is that, they do gardening, they do farming. Shepherd is their mainstay, like a profession, and everything that they have, including wine and meat. Meat is a very small portion of their diet, but yes, it is a portion of their diet. Their diet is largely legume-based, homemade, and they have all whole wheat-based pastas and breads.
Priti, we'll have to wrap up soon, so just
Yeah,
takeaways. How do you make blue zones at home?
Okay, so you want a crash course on that. Okay, so I think one thing which, I think couple of, it got mentioned earlier also, bonding is very, very critical. Bonding socially, bonding within the family, bonding with your, maybe your neighbors, your community. I'm not talking about during your working hours, I'm talking about after your working hours or beyond your working hours. Bonding is critical. Wisdom bridge across generations. Again, very, very critical. We spoke about what happens when we turn 80. Do we want to feel unimportant? Do we want to feel not required anymore? That wisdom bridge, because what is missing today in today's busy lifestyle is not being able to pass from the grandchild to the grandson or the granddaughter. We're not able to pass that wisdom, and that wisdom gives the sense of purpose to the elder generation, and it gives a very strong foundation to the younger generations, which is missing, and that inculcated more and more goes with the family bonds. Community rituals and celebration, this was very strongly there. Every 100th birthday is celebrated like in the whole community kind of a thing. So that with that bond continues, mutual aids, they're very, very helping to each other. I think that is something that as we are getting busier in the, so if you see there is a whole common theme that is coming out, what brings them together, and that sense of belonging. And very, very important, I want to just talk about, so they put this, there's a beautiful Sardinia pictures, and they put every centenarian is like painted on the wall. One very, very important thing, if everybody has to bring a blue zone in your life, in your family, is what Saurabh also mentioned, was a purpose. I think we need to have a purpose to our every morning. We have to have a purpose to our every day, to our lives. And I think that is critical, and that is critical till the last. So, and that is where, the whole thing converges into a health span. So basically, living fit, everybody's just covered it. I don't want to spend time summarizing it, but I think purpose and bonding in addition to whatever has already been discussed.
Yeah, thank you very much, Priti. what we have now is just a, can I just have the slide mover? So we have a very interesting questionnaire on your positive health and longevity awareness quotient, which the organizers have put together with a well-known longevity clinic. And I mean, I've gone through it already, and it's very nice. It's a QR code. So just put it on your phones and participate in this questionnaire. I mean, fill up this questionnaire. And Vasu, you promised to send us our quotient soon, in the next 48 hours? Okay, so you will receive your longevity awareness quotient in the next 48 hours. So just put it on your phones and go for it. Those who are with us online will have both the QR code and the link. So you can fill that question, and while that questionnaire is being filled up, I know that we've gone beyond time a little bit, but happy to take questions. Any of us, please address any questions that you have. We'll take 2 or 3 questions. Dr. Nagi Reddy.
Sorry, I'm a gastroenterologist. This question comes from I looked at these blue zones very carefully, and there are 9 things that they give in the blue zone, 9 positivities, of course, nutrition, health, the usual stuff. But one of the important things consistently in all the blue zones is that all these people are taking wine at least 3 times a week. What's the panel's opinion?
So I will give an opinion on that. But the problem is that Nagi's and my opinion will be very similar. We do the same thing. So see, my take on this is that I mean we've heard about all the wine drinking in the Mediterranean diet, and a lot of the Mediterranean countries practice that. And you know it as well as I do that taking a glass of wine or 2 a day for your entire life probably does not much harm and probably does you good in terms of vasodilatation and reduced coronary artery and neurovascular disease risk. But you see, the problem is they do 50 other things, which we do not do. We just want to emulate the wine drinking. But if you don't do the rest of the lifestyle, then really you're not justified in saying that because these guys drink wine and live 110 years, I'm going to do the same. But I'm still going to have my chocolates at night, and I'm going to have all the sweet things I love, and I'm never going to move my ass and sit on my backside and not exercise. No, that doesn't work. You have to do the whole thing, right? Is that an adequate answer? Any more questions?
So good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dr. Deshpande. I'm a pathologist. 42 years experience in my life, but I'm still working. My age is 76 now, but still working. I sleep only 4-5 hours, no more sleep. Music and dance is my favorite. Traveling is more favorite. This is, and eat less, work more. That's my longevity.
Thank you very much, sir, for that insight. It is completely scientific. Work more is purpose, work more is moving, is mobility, is exercise, is cognitive exercise, and eat less, we've already heard from Deepak, works.